Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is around mentorship and versus sponsorship, but then more specifically is around how to develop personal sponsors. This is a topic that I've seen people talking about more and more. So just bear me 2 seconds and I will move my slides. So this is just a brief agenda of things I'm going to discuss. So the first one is really about just the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, because that also generally I find that people don't necessarily know what the difference is. And then a little bit around formal versus informal sponsorship. But the main theme around what I want to talk about is more to do with informal sponsorship. And that is something I am hugely passionate about. So I love this cartoon because I think it depicts perfectly what the difference is between mentorship and sponsorship. So if you guys have a little look at this, and then I'm just going to talk you through, why I think this is a great cartoon. So have you tried applying to speak at conferences and meetups already? That's definitely something that a mentor will do, which is give advice and make suggestions, versus a sponsor already recommending you for speaking at like a concert or a gig in the example of this cartoon. And the real kind of difference for me is a sponsor is an advocate and will advocate for you, whereas a mentor is about giving advice and guidance, and it's very much a very different type of relationship, which is going to become more apparent as I go through kind of the next bunch of slides. So just a little bit on formal versus informal. So there are companies that have formal sponsorship programs, and so typically that's where you have somebody who's senior to you that's been assigned to you, so it's not an organic relationship, and it's very unlikely that you know this person already, and like I said, it's usually through a company program. What I want to talk about today really is around informal sponsors, and that there's a lot of power in having one of those. And this is typically someone who's senior to you, but they choose to be your sponsor. And it's very likely, because they've chosen you, that you already have that existing relationship. I want to share this stat with you because this, for me, was super powerful. So over 11.5% in terms of people who have a sponsor are being paid 11.5% more than those that don't, which for me, when I read that, I was like, that's insane. Now, notwithstanding, I've also kept the second stat in, which is that there's this sponsorship premium that exists. So, not unsurprisingly, it's higher for men than it is for women. But even so, I still think that, 11.5% more is, significant. And so is 10.2% than somebody that doesn't have a sponsor. We can talk some more about this as I, kind of wrap up the slides, but I just think it's a really interesting stat for sure. So what I often get asked about is, how do you identify your sponsor? So usually it's not your line manager. I can think of, for me personally, 3 examples where it has been my line manager, but typically it's somebody who's senior, who you work in and around, but don't always have that day-to-day connection with. And when I was talking through this with one of my mentees the other day, one of the things I was talking about are the tells, because it's not about you going and asking somebody to be your sponsor. It's about them selecting you. In order to kind of identify who your sponsor is, the tells for me are things like where they might include you in their professional network. So you might have been having a conversation about a specific topic, and they may turn around and be like, oh, hey, I know this person and they may be able to help you. Let me introduce you. That's one of the tells that you know that this person might be your sponsor. But another one is that they're personally invested in your professional advancement. So again, this could be out of a conversation that you've had where they'll think of, oh, have you read this book? Have you thought about this podcast? Have you done this, that, and the other? Because they have a genuine personal interest in your professional advancement. And then the 2 key things for me, which are crucial to identify somebody that's a sponsor, and they're really hard to identify because these things both happen typically when you're not in the room. So they'll actively advocate for you, and then equally as importantly, they'll defend your actions. So an example of which might be, sorry, Kim, I'm going to pick on you because I can see your face also doing this, but I might be in a meeting and Kim says, I've got this project going. I really need this person to be this, this, and this. And then I go, oh, hold on a second. I know the perfect person for this. Have you spoken to Kevin? Kevin is not included in this conversation. He's not even in the room, but I'm advocating for him because I know that actually these are things that he would be really good at, but Kim might not know that he's good at those things. Equally, Kim might say to me, I'm really unimpressed with Kevin. Like, he's been late with giving me this piece of work. And then I might say, hold on a second, that sounds like it's out of character for Kevin. I've worked with Kevin a lot. There must be a reason for it. Thanks, Kevin. So those are kind of just the examples, but they're very hard to spot. But where you might recognize them is when you've been advocated for, because usually the sponsor will then come in to see you after that meeting and say, hi, Kevin, I've put you forward for this project for Kim. Or, hey, Kevin, I've heard that you haven't delivered something on time. That sounds unlike you. Is everything okay? Those are your tells as to whether they've been advocating or defending you within rooms that you're just not in. And there are ways that you could look to identify a sponsor. This, if you leave with nothing else, is the one thing I want everybody to think about, which is sponsorship is not about who you know, but it's about who knows you. And for me, this really is the epitome of everything that informal sponsorship is about, because you could know absolutely everybody in the business that you work in, but if they don't know who you are and what you're about, they're not going to sponsor you. And then I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about attracting a sponsor, because this is something I also get asked. So this is all great. I've identified that I think I don't have a sponsor, or I may have a sponsor, but how do I get one? Can I go and ask them? And typically a sponsor, particularly an informal sponsor, the relationship's organic, and you don't go and say, hi, Kim, could you be my sponsor? It just doesn't work that way. But what you can do is find ways to attract them. So a few weeks back, obviously Lucy talked a lot about personal brand in one of these sessions, and having a really strong personal brand and making that known will attract sponsors that align to the values and your personal brand. So that's really important. Another thing is about being consistent and a solid performer, because for example, I'm going to pick on Kevin again. Kevin is this strong performer that would be highlighted and recognized and think, oh, hold on, I align to his personal brand. He always performs, and exceeds expectations sometimes. This makes him more attractive to a sponsor. But then there is something that you can do whilst you're looking for a sponsor, which is about identifying who you want as a sponsor, because there will be a ton of people, it's likely, that you work with, that all of them could be your sponsor, but you also need to be comfortable that they align to your values and their personal brand, and you'd be happy for them to advocate for you in a meeting or in a room that you're not in, and that you want to be associated with that person. The other thing I always talk about with this is around having clear career goals, so that, when you're having these conversations with these senior people who you don't know necessarily whether they're your sponsor or not, but once they do know that, okay, so in the next 2 years, I want to have achieved this, and then I'd really like to do that, that's front and center of their mind, so that they can then go and sponsor you when that project or that new team that you're going to go and manage comes up and say, hey, I know somebody who'd be interested in that, because you've already shared what your clear career goals are. And then finally, and the most important one, I think, is about taking opportunities with exposure. So I've written this in a very specific way, because I used to have a boss that used to tell me, hey, Charlotte, I've got this great opportunity for you. If it's an opportunity with exposure, people will not talk about it as an opportunity. They'll say, hi, I've put you forward for this, or I think you'd be great at that. Typically, when somebody says, I've got an opportunity for you, it's usually because they were giving you a piece of their work that they don't really want to do, but they're dressing it up as an opportunity. An opportunity with exposure is something that's usually quite high profile and might be out of your comfort zone, but it's about just saying yes. And actually, one of the other mentors in this group talked about saying yes a lot, and she, unfortunately, I don't think she's here today, but this kind of resonates with that, which is about saying yes to these opportunities of exposure. But be warned when somebody says, I've got a great opportunity for you, because usually I find that's a way to package up that it's not. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on in my slides are real examples of people who I've had as sponsors. And obviously I'm not going to name them in this, but so I've given them kind of, well, now what looks like long-winded titles. But so for me, like, one of the first people I recognised as a sponsor was the person I call the project sponsor turned personal sponsor. So this guy joined our executive team in this company I worked for, and this is like kind of in my early mid part of my career, and I was doing a piece of work in the international arena, and there was obviously something about my personal brand, my work ethic, that he seemed to really like. And what I should say at this point is that I didn't recognize he was my sponsor until after the fact. So once that project had finished, he said to me, so you've had some experience with Asia now. As part of my team, my sales team, we're going to go and present at an exhibition. I'd really like you to come and join. So I went to Hong Kong with him and the team, and I went and joined, and it gave him an opportunity to get to know me even more than what he knew from the work that I'd produced delivering this project that he was the sponsor for. And then one day I was in the lift going to the office after we're back, and he came up to me and he said, Charlotte, I have a job in my team. I'd really like you to apply for it. Please have a read about it. I haven't published it yet to anybody else, but I've also spoken to the rest of the exec, and we think you would be great at that. So the reason I share this is because I didn't recognise that this person was a sponsor. He then came on to be my boss, and I worked for him several times. But what he was doing, he obviously recognised that my personal brand, what I was about, aligned to how he worked, and actually we worked incredibly well together. But then he also didn't say to me, have you thought about it? It was more, I've got this job and I want you to apply for it. He also created opportunities for us to spend more time together, for him to figure out whether I would be the right person to join his team. The other example I have here is what I call the woman's woman sponsor. So I've had a couple of these where I've either worked for or worked with very closely senior women who are looking to push forward more women in their organisations. And I know I'm very lucky because this doesn't happen very often, because there are so few women in leadership positions, where every opportunity they can, they push forward a woman that they align to, that they think that would deliver well. This comes back to my statement earlier about being a solid performer. So the one specific example in this is where this particular member of the exec said to me, I've put you forward to do some work with the chairman of the board, who I had never met. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, it's the right thing to do, etc. I think it'll be great for you. It's great exposure. Didn't use the word opportunity, but did say it was great exposure. He then phoned me to say, look, I've heard great things about you, but unfortunately, I've already allocated this work to somebody else. However, I will consider you for this next special project. Circle forward, the next special project came around. They were throwing some people's names around. And she then said, hold on a second. You said that you talked to Charlotte. And so they were, yes, absolutely. And so she kept my name in the conversation, and I ended up doing this piece of like special project with the chairman of the board. And then the last example I have, which is completely to the extreme of the other two, is that you're far too experienced for this sponsor, where I worked with somebody who was more senior than me in the technology role. So he was responsible for engineers, and I was responsible for kind of like the product and project side of things. So I had a different reporting line to him. And he created more opportunities for me because he could see that I was bored and I was in a job that was too junior for me. He also then and I only know this because he relayed this conversation, which is how I recognised he was a sponsor, said to the CTO, there are only 2 people in my team that I trust, and one of them is this person and one of them is Charlotte. To which the CTO said, hold on a second, Charlotte's not in your team. And he said, yeah, I know that, but I consider her as part of my team, and you should consider her as part of the leadership team. And that's how I recognised that he was a sponsor, because he was going and having these conversations and trying to push me forward to do kind of more senior and more experienced things. So that was just something I kind of wanted to share. There are some really great resources that exist out there. So Kim will know this, I'm a big reader. So one of the books I recommend on this is The Sponsor Effect, really great book. And that is really aimed at how, the strapline is how to be a better leader by investing in others. This is really about encouraging you to go out and sponsor people, whether it's whether they're a man or a woman. I think there's some other interesting pieces. So there's a great piece in the Harvard Business Review, which is a lack of sponsorship is keeping women from advancing into leadership. Really insightful. But then there's actually some other resources out there that I really liked. There's a TED talk that Carla Harris did, which is about how to find, your sponsor and those people that can help you get ahead at work. And then LinkedIn also has a great course with women transforming tech and finding a sponsor. And then for anybody that likes a podcast, Harvard Business Review also did one called Sponsorship, Defining the Relationship, also fascinating. Those are all my slides. I'm going to stop sharing, but I'd love to have some conversations with you guys if you have any questions or you want to just explore anything further.
I have some questions, Charlotte.
Go for it.
And I can hear myself, which is quite good. So, much like mentoring, I think some people might feel like they want to understand what's in it for the other party. So I think one of people's concerns with like getting a mentor is, do I really want to put that on someone and have someone do all that for me when there's nothing in it for them? And I constantly tell people there are lots of benefits to being the mentor. What do you see as the benefits of being the sponsor in the relationship?
For me personally, where I've sponsored people, it's because the benefit I find is that I can influence their career. And whilst I might not be their direct line manager, but when I can recognise that there's potential, or actually that they're not being stretched enough, or they're potentially a flight risk, then it's a great opportunity to have somebody else that's in the senior position to be able to go, you know what, there's an opportunity to do something here that they're clearly not getting from their line manager. And even if they are, I think it also depends on where you sit in that org structure. But for me, just because I have a team of people doesn't mean those are the only team of people that I care about. And I think, it's that's one of the benefits. Like on a personal level, I enjoy coaching, mentoring people, and presenting people with opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. And then I think the second benefit for that is, it keeps people in organizations for longer, like having somebody to, create these roles or create these opportunities with exposure keeps people engaged in the business. So those would be kind of the benefits I see.
Yeah. I get the other one I've heard is it's quite good for the sponsor to have an army of trusted followers. So, if you are responsible for leading a project, you are the project sponsor, you want good people working on it, and you want those good people to have some reason to want to work with you. Yeah. So, so if you are demonstrating those capabilities you spoke about, which will attract a sponsor, for me, they're the reasons that the sponsor would be attracted to you. And then the second question I've got is, I read an article which, not surprisingly, suggested that men are more likely to have a sponsor than women. Do you think that's to do with unconscious bias or conscious bias on the behalf of the sponsor who's going out and looking for someone to sponsor? Or do you think it's something that women aren't doing or are doing, which is preventing them from having a sponsor?
I think it's a combination of the two in reality. I think women aren't so good at like slipping into conversation. Here are my 3 career goals, as opposed to a guy that will, find a way to do that. But then also, from my mentoring, I spend a lot of time on personal brand. And I think, women tend to feel more uncomfortable about it. And I'm like, why? For me, I always talk about my personal brand being like a statement of 3 things, which is problem solver, customer obsessed, data driven. So everything I do ties back to that. And so I will use certain phrases in work to restate those things about me. But if you're not doing that, then of course it's going to hold you back, because people don't know what you're about and what your values are. Whereas I think men are much more forward about these things. So that would be one part of it. And then in terms of the bias part, I mean, that for me is a wider conversation about people like hiring in their own reflection and things like that. But, I think it's probably a bit of both. But from what women could do, they absolutely need to think about how they go about attracting those sponsors, even if it's pushing them outside of their comfort zones.
Thank you.
Charlotte, for a sponsor, though, it could be anyone who advocates for you. So it doesn't have to be someone more senior than you. It could just be someone in your network who, when they see opportunities, says, oh, hey, what about Kim? Because I think I've not, the concept of sponsorship, I've not actually thought about it much before. And I'm going to go back and think about who maybe has sponsored me over the years. But if I just think about LinkedIn in the last year and a half, and the number of people who are out looking for work, and the way people were helping each other when they saw something that might not be right for them, what about that person? And I think that's all a form of sponsorship, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I guess where I was coming from with my slides is typically in an organization, it tends to be somebody who is senior, because they're usually in rooms that not everyone else is in, right? But you're absolutely right. And I've also seen the same thing this year, and I've been doing it with people I've mentored or more junior people I've worked with that I know are looking for work. I've tagged them into things. I've shared lots of articles. That's all forms of sponsorship for sure.
Yeah, interesting. I think too, to Kevin's question around like men versus women and sponsors, I mean, my own observation after 30 years in the work world, my weakest managers were normally female versus male. And more times than not, as they moved up the ladder moved up with them. So I would have had more men who would have supported and been an advocate for me than the 2 female women that I've reported to in my career, which is, I mean, that's not a statement against all women, but from my experience, they were the last ones who I would have felt were sponsoring. If anything, sabotaging would be the S word, I would say, as opposed to sponsoring. And I think maybe there's just that comes back to their own level of confidence and security and feeling good about themselves, as opposed to, worried about who's coming up and trying to take the job.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think from my point of view, I haven't experienced that to the same degree you have. I've certainly have experienced one female manager, if you like, that has behaved in what I would call sabotage way, the way you've described. But that was more about her than it was about me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which usually it is in my experience. But I think, I've been lucky in the fact that I feel like I've had a fairly even split of sponsors and advocates for me. It started off more male heavy, but I definitely think as time's gone on, it's more and more women are starting to do that. And for me, I'm all about women supporting women, and I try and surround myself with that tribe of people, be it whether they're senior or not. And I think we have a responsibility to each other to support each other, and if we can sponsor women, then we should. Absolutely. Notwithstanding, I will say I do sponsor men as well internally, but I think to help support women, it's important.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks. Any other questions, thoughts? So you could have a bunch of different sponsors, and it's not that not like a mentorship where when you're mentoring someone, you're with them for 12, 18 months, your regular dialogue and whatnot. The sponsorship is more sporadic, isn't it?
Informal. There's no way that I would go up to one of these people and say, "Hi, would you be my sponsor?" Because it's not like that. The beauty of a sponsorship is it's an entirely organic relationship, and there is no kind of, I don't want to say strings, but there's no kind of like forcing that involvement. And also I think, like, for me, in my experience, people have sponsored me at different times for different things. And I think, just because you're working in this one particular area now, and then you've got this one particular sponsor, if you then move somewhere else, then you might end up having or attracting other sponsors, and that sponsor may become less interested.
Yeah, it was really good chat. I mean, you've opened my eyes to a lot on it, just putting a name around something that I hadn't really thought about before, so thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. I mean, listen, I hadn't really thought about it much myself until I started reading a lot about it more recently. And I think it's something that people are becoming more and more aware of, particularly like pay scale, for example, like doing that survey.
Yeah.
And I think that's eye-watering, amount of money that can change to somebody's salary, regardless of the fact that it's impacting men more than women. I think that shows it's a significant thing. And when I was putting together my examples, I really had to retrospect on my career and really actually, oh my god, this person was my sponsor the whole time and I had no idea. Whereas because I've come more sort of tuned into it, I can spot them now, which is why I talk about the tells. But you have to be really tuned into that.
Yeah. But why do you think it is that by having a sponsor, there is that 10 or 11% pay difference? Is it because they're given opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise?
I think so, because it's what, when I was talking about opportunities with exposure, when you're given those types of opportunities with exposure, usually they will lead to either, some sort of promotion, pay increase, like a bonus. Because usually opportunities with exposure are like special projects or strategic projects, or need you to go and fix this because this customer is going to leave us types of scenarios. But this person's already a solid performer. So they've already got this amazing base that they're just building on and showcasing. And then I think you also have to think the employer can see this. And if the employer can see this and they can see this, why would they stay at that organization if they're not going to be rewarded for going next level?
Yeah, makes sense.
Jane, any thoughts from you?
No, I was on mute. No, I was just thinking again, similar to what Kim was saying. Actually, my experience has been the other way around, where I've had men try and sabotage, and I've always had really good female bosses who have been real advocates. And again, like you, sort of thinking about things that have happened in the past, where you think, oh gosh, yeah, that person was sponsoring me. I mean, I remember, gosh, many years ago, probably more than I care to count, going to see the director of operations, being a fairly junior member of the team, and saying, I'm a bit bored, have you got any projects? And she went, yeah, go away and do this. At which point I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do that. But she had faith, and I did do it and delivered it. And actually, when we had a conversation several years later, she said, after you left, I didn't really know whether you were the right person for it anyway, but you did it. So it's just some of those sort of opportunities, I guess, that you like you say, you create for yourself, don't you? You put yourself out there, and I think as well, just thinking back in terms of the people that I've worked with, I can certainly see where I've sponsored people, not necessarily knowing that was what I was doing at the time, if you like, but and then watching their careers develop, that always gives you a sense of satisfaction. It sort of goes back to Kevin's question really about what's in it for the mentor, or the sponsor. It is about watching people grow and develop, and their confidence gets higher. You sort of see them getting promotions that perhaps they might not have put themselves forward before. So I think it's very rewarding from that point of view.
Cool. Neeti, Paige, any thoughts from either of you?
Hey, Charlotte. Hey, sorry, I've got my video off because I'm currently eating.
It's
I
okay,
didn't think you
don't worry.
guys, I didn't think you guys needed to see me stuffing my face. So,
right.
Charlotte, I found that fascinating because, as Jane said, I've never actually distinguished between sponsorship and mentoring, and it made me actually think about well, when's it happened to me, and also when have I done it? And I think, as Jane said, I've unconsciously or I've done it without realizing to others where I've seen potential in somebody, and or as Kevin has said, I've had a project which I needed delivered well, and I've ensured that people who I think could I've advocated for those individuals who are best fit for that project. But again, also I've had it happen to me where I've been put forward for things, but I've never realised, the term sponsorship. And I've been actually I had a search for the Harvard Business Review article and the TED Talk because I found it fascinating. So thank you. I mean, it's a concept that I couldn't articulate and wasn't aware of, even though it was happening to me and I was doing it myself. So thank you. I found it really useful.
Oh, great. Thanks. Paige, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I was kind of just going to say the same as Neeti, really. I think that I'm starting to realise in my role at the moment that potentially my manager is acting as a bit of a sponsor. And I think I was just kind of singing his praises in like, oh, he's a really good manager, and he wants me to do well and supports my goals, and all of that is true. But I think that the word sponsor I'm now aligning that with the actions, because I think like things that he's done for me and putting me in on training that I necessarily didn't qualify for, but he knows that I want to go into that role, so he's kind of bent the rules and shoved me in there anyway. And I think before I just kind of thought, oh, he's just being dead good, but now I'm kind of aligning that terminology with it, that I'm realizing he is kind of acting as my sponsor. And I think the same as everybody else has said, when you realize potential, for example, in one of my colleagues who's now left the business, I don't know, rightly or wrongly, or for good or for bad, might have had a role in kind of getting her that, like making her leave the business and seeing her potential to move because she was a bit trapped. So yeah, I think it's just aligning that terminology with the actions has helped me a lot.
Oh, that's great to hear. I also, by the way, it sounds like you've got a great boss.
Yeah.
So I talk about, usually it's not your boss or your line manager, but certainly I can draw on a couple of experiences where I know that they've gone above and beyond. And like my style from a kind of leadership perspective is, you're only as successful as your team are. And that's why I think it's important to sponsor and to advocate. And even if it's not your team, but it's somebody that your team works closely with or you've worked closely with, people don't get enough praise and enough, exposure to things sometimes, particularly to the more senior people in organizations. And I think finding opportunities to do this enables us to celebrate success more.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I think that with that senior role, they do have more visibility over what's available, and I think that they can kind of cherry pick and see who should go forward to what, because for example, that training I didn't even know existed, and it was him that approached me and said, I can bend the rules for you and get you in, and I think that without him doing that, I would never have been exposed to that. And yeah, I'm appreciative of it.
Right. Anybody got any other thoughts? Okay, well, thank you for joining me, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and I will share the slides with Kevin and the resources on there, and feel free to, you know, connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not already, and you know, I'm always happy to discuss this type of stuff.
So thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that I'll share the slides out, and assuming everyone's okay, I'll post a link to the recording as well, so the other members that aren't here can benefit from it. It was great. Thank you, Charlotte, and thanks everyone else.
Welcome.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Charlotte.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.